The email glowed on my laptop screen like a toxic flame, each word burning deeper into my consciousness. Urgent. About your father's other family. I stared at the subject line until the letters blurred, my manicured fingers frozen above the keyboard in my Tampa Bay executive suite. Laura Mendoza, Senior VP of Human Resources, had handled every conceivable workplace crisis over 23 years. Employee embezzlement, sexual harassment cases, hostile takeovers, I'd navigated them all with professional calm. But this email, sent by someone named Sofia Martinez, shattered my composure like glass against concrete. I clicked it open with trembling fingers. Miss Hara, I know this will be shocking, but I believe we are half sisters. Your father, Roberto Mendoza, has been supporting my family for 37 years. My mother, Maria Martinez, recently passed, and while sorting through her belongings, I found documents, photos, and letters that prove our connection. I'm attaching copies. I think it's time the truth came out. The attachments loaded slowly, each image a dagger to my heart. Birth certificates, bank statements showing monthly transfers from my father's account, photos of a man who looked exactly like Papa, my papa, holding children who had his smile, his eyes, his distinctive cleft chin, children who called him Papa, a whole other family. My office, 17 floors above Tampa Bay, suddenly felt like a cage. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the water stretched endlessly, reflecting the afternoon sun in painful brightness. I squinted at the screen, studying faces that mirrored my own. Sophia looked to be about my age, 45, with my father's proud posture and my grandmother's delicate features. Two younger people stood beside her, labeled in pen on the back. Miguel, 26, and Carmen, 23. My half-siblings. My father had 3 other children. The dates on the documents made my stomach lurch. The first bank transfer was dated 38 years ago, just 2 years after my parents' wedding. Papa had been supporting another family since I was a toddler. Every business trip to Miami, every weekend visiting suppliers, every time he'd come home with gifts and stories about lonely hotels and difficult clients, lies. Mrs. Mendoza? My assistant's voice through the intercom startled me back to the present. Your 3 o'clock is here. Cancel it. I croaked, my voice barely recognizable. Family emergency. Family. The word tasted bitter now, contaminated by decades of deception. I gathered my purse with shaking hands and rushed past concerned colleagues toward the elevator. The 17th floor descent felt endless, each floor marking another year I'd lived believing a lie. Papa, the man I'd worshipped, the man who taught me that integrity was everything, the man whose approval I'd spent my entire life earning, had been living a double life for nearly 4 decades. The parking garage was mercifully empty as I fumbled with my keys. I needed to get home to Rafael and Diego. My husband's steady wisdom would help me process this revelation. My 17-year-old son would need comfort when he learned his grandfather, his hero, wasn't who we thought he was. But even as I pulled onto the coastal highway, a terrible thought crept in. What if they already knew? My phone rang through the car speakers. Rafael's voice, tight with strain. Laura, where are you? We need to talk. It's about your father. The Honda swerved slightly as my grip tightened on the wheel. What about Papa? The silence stretched too long. Rafael? Someone came to the house today. A woman named Sofia Martinez. She says she's Roberto's daughter. Rafael had always called my father by his first name, maintaining the respectful distance of a son-in-law who admired but didn't worship the man. She says he's been supporting her family since before you were born. My vision blurred with tears. I know I got her email. Rafael, how is this possible? How could Papa... There's more. Rafael's voice was gentle but firm, the same tone he used when delivering difficult news to Diego. Laura, your mother knew. She's always known. The car lurched as I pulled over, unable to drive through the storm of emotions. My mother, sweet, devout mama, who went to daily mass and lit candles for our family's protection, had known about Papa's betrayal for 37 years, had quietly accepted it, had smiled and cooked his favorite meals and ironed his shirts while he maintained another household 300 miles away. "Where's Diego?" I managed to ask. "At baseball practice." But he's been asking questions. Strange questions about your father's business trips, about why we never visit the Miami family his abuelo occasionally mentions. I think he suspected something wasn't right. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, the leather cool against my burning skin. My son, my brilliant, perceptive son, who was already talking about following Papa into business, had been piecing together inconsistencies while I lived in blind devotion. "I'm on my way home," I whispered. The coastal highway stretched before me, the water to my right sparkling in cruel contrast to the darkness enveloping my life. Everything I believed about my family, about the man who'd raised me, about the foundation of my entire existence, all of it was crumbling. Papa had always been my North Star, the immigrant who built a successful construction business from nothing, the man who insisted on honesty in all dealings, who taught me that our family name meant something in the community, the father who'd worked 3 jobs to put me through college, who'd walked me down the aisle with tears of pride in his eyes, who'd held Diego as a newborn and whispered promises about legacy and family honor, all built on lies. As I turned into our driveway, I saw Rafael waiting on the porch, his tall frame filling the doorway with reassuring presence. His face, the face I'd woken up to for 27 years, looked concerned but steady, ready to be the anchor our family needed in this storm. Beside him sat a woman I didn't recognize, but whose features were unmistakably familiar. She had Papa's eyes, Abuela's smile, and my own stubborn chin. Sofia Martinez, my half-sister, living proof that the man I'd idolized was a stranger. "Laura," she said as I approached, her voice gentle but firm. "I know this is shocking, but we need to talk about Papa's other family and about what happens to his estate when he's gone." Estate, inheritance, money. The practical concerns hit me like a physical blow. Papa's business, the properties, the savings I'd always assumed would help secure Diego's future. All of it would now be divided among children I'd never known existed. I stood frozen on my own porch, in front of my own house, watching the life I'd built on my father's foundation crumble like sand. Everything I'd believed about family, about integrity, about the man whose approval had shaped every decision I'd ever made. All of it was falling apart. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I remembered Ileana from accounting mentioning that she was praying for me and my family. At the time, I'd smiled politely and moved on. Prayer was for people who needed help, and Laura Mendoza stood on her own 2 feet. Always had. Now those feet were planted on shifting sand, and I had no idea how to find solid ground again. 6 months earlier, life had been a masterpiece I'd painted with careful, confident strokes. Laura sat in her corner office, reviewing quarterly reports while the afternoon sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Tampa Bay. At 45, she commanded respect as Senior VP of Human Resources, a title that had taken 23 years of strategic climbing to achieve. Her phone buzzed with a text from Papa. "Mija, dinner Sunday after church? I have good news about the Miami expansion." Laura smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. Roberto Mendoza, at 72, was still expanding his construction empire, still planning, still achieving. The man was legendary in Tampa's Hispanic business community, the immigrant who'd arrived with nothing and built an empire through sheer determination and unwavering principles. That Sunday, Laura sat in her parents' familiar dining room, surrounded by the photo gallery that chronicled their American dream. Papa at various construction sites, the family at Diego's baptism, Laura's college graduation with Papa beaming beside her in his best suit, the restaurant opening he'd financed for a struggling cousin, charity events where Papa's generosity made headlines. Rafael carved the roast while Diego helped Mama clear appetizer plates. Her husband's easy competence in the kitchen reflected the steady reliability that had attracted Laura to him in the first place. Unlike the volatile men some of her friends had married, Rafael Herrera was a rock, a devoted father and husband who'd built his own successful accounting practice through patience and integrity. The Miami project is approved, Papa announced, raising his wine glass. 6 months, and we'll have the biggest Latino owned construction firm in South Florida. Diego's 17 and already showing his father's analytical mind alongside Papa's business instincts, leaned forward eagerly. Abuelo, can I work on the project this summer? Learn the business from the ground up like you did? Papa's eyes crinkled with pride. Of course, mijo. A man builds his legacy through family. Everything I've created is for you and your mother. Laura felt the familiar swell of pride and gratitude. This man, her father, had sacrificed everything to give her opportunities he'd never had. While other fathers drank away their paychecks or abandoned their families, Papa had worked 18-hour days, attended every school event, taught her that excellence was the only acceptable standard. Diego's lucky to have such a role model, Raphael said, his voice carrying genuine respect. Not every boy gets to learn business from someone with Roberto's reputation for integrity. Raphael had always admired Papa without the worshipful devotion Laura felt. As an accountant, he appreciated Papa's business acumen while maintaining professional objectivity about the man's methods. It was one of the things Laura loved about her husband, his ability to respect people without losing his own identity in the process. Remember, Misha, Papa often said during her childhood, our name means something in this community. We don't lie, we don't cheat, we don't cut corners. The Mendoza family stands for integrity. Those words had shaped Laura's entire identity. She'd built her HR career on ethical leadership, earned her MBA while working full-time, climbed the corporate ladder without compromising her values. She was Roberto Mendoza's daughter, and that meant something. After dinner, while Mama cleared dishes with Diego's help, Papa pulled Laura aside on the porch, overlooking their well-manicured yard. Raphael was inside reviewing some papers for Papa's business, a quarterly ritual where he double-checked the books as a favor to family. I'm proud of you, Mija, Papa said, his weathered hand squeezing her shoulder. You've honored our family name. You've married a good man who strengthens our family. You've raised Diego to understand what success looks like when built on honor. Laura basked in his approval like sunlight. At 45 years old, Papa's praise still mattered more than any corporate recognition. He was her benchmark for integrity, her proof that good men existed, her reason for believing hard work and honesty would always triumph. I learned from the best, Papa, she replied, meaning every word. Inside, she could hear Raphael's deep voice mixing with Diego's higher tones as they discussed college plans. Her son was torn between business school and engineering, wanting to honor both his grandfather's entrepreneurial legacy and his father's analytical nature. Dad says college is about learning to think, not just learning to earn, Diego had told her recently, but Abuelo says thinking without action is just daydreaming. It was a perfect summary of the two men who were shaping her son. Raphael, methodical and thoughtful, teaching Diego that success meant more than financial achievement. Papa, dynamic and driven, showing Diego that dreams without execution were worthless. That evening, driving home along the coast with Rafael and Diego, Laura felt the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. Her family was strong, her career was thriving. Her father's legacy would continue through Diego, who already showed both the Mendoza drive and the Herrera integrity. Your grandfather is remarkable, Rafael said, but his tone was measured rather than awed. He's built something impressive, but Diego, remember that how you build something matters as much as what you build. Diego nodded thoughtfully from the back seat. Dad, do you think I should focus more on business or engineering? Follow your passion, mijo, Rafael replied. Your grandfather followed his, and look what he created. But make sure your passion aligns with your values. Money without meaning isn't success. Laura smiled at her husband's wisdom. This was why she'd married Rafael Herrera. His ability to see clearly without cynicism, to appreciate greatness without losing his own moral center. He'd never compete with Papa for Diego's admiration, but he'd give their son something equally valuable, a model of quiet strength and unwavering principles. The next week, at the monthly Hispanic Business Leaders Luncheon, Laura listened with pride as the organization president praised Papa's latest charitable contribution, funding trade school scholarships for underprivileged youth. Roberto Mendoza embodies the values that built this community, the president said. Family first, hard work, and giving back. He's proof that the American dream is alive for those willing to pursue it with integrity. Laura caught Papa's eye across the room and smiled. He nodded slightly, his modest acknowledgement of praise he never sought but always deserved. Other fathers in their community had scandals, had abandoned families, had chosen money over morals. Papa was different. Papa was everything a father should be. That afternoon, while reviewing employee files in her office, Laura's assistant mentioned seeing Papa's photo in the business journal. Your father is such an inspiration, she said. My husband dreams of building something like that. Having a father-in-law like Roberto Mendoza must be incredible for Rafael. It was, though, Rafael wore that privilege lightly. He'd often told Laura that he'd learned valuable lessons from Papa while maintaining his own standards and methods. Rafael didn't try to become Papa. He simply absorbed what was useful while staying true to his own character. Sunday dinners continued their ritual pattern, Papa sharing business wisdom with Diego, Mama serving his favorite dishes, Rafael contributing thoughtful questions that showed he was listening without competing for attention. Laura felt grateful for the stability her father provided and the balance her husband brought to their family dynamics. You know what I'm most proud of? Papa said one evening as they walked to their cars. It's not the business or the money. It's that my daughter married a man of honor and raised a grandson I can be proud of. You've carried our name with dignity, Mija. That's worth more than any fortune. Laura drove home that night with tears in her eyes, tears of gratitude for having a father who set such a high standard and a husband who helped her live up to it. Raphael's steady presence had given her the security to pursue her career ambitions, while Papa's example had given her the drive to achieve them. The pedestal she'd built for Roberto Mendoza was sky high, constructed from 45 years of admiration, respect, and absolute trust. Papa was her hero, her moral compass, her proof that good men existed. She had no idea that pedestals, no matter how carefully constructed, could crumble in an instant when the foundation beneath them turned out to be built on lies. The morning after Sophia's revelation, I woke up feeling like I was drowning in quicksand. Every breath required conscious effort. The woman who'd spent 23 years managing corporate crises couldn't even manage to get out of bed without her hands shaking. Rafael had made coffee and was sitting at the breakfast table with Diego, both of them speaking in the low, careful tones people use around someone who's grieving. My husband's strong presence filled the kitchen. He'd clearly spent the early morning hours being the steady father figure Diego needed while his mother fell apart. Morning, amor, Rafael said gently, rising to pour me coffee. How did you sleep? I didn't, I replied honestly, accepting the mug with grateful hands. Diego sat pushing around scrambled eggs while stealing worried glances at me. My son's so much like Papa with his serious dark eyes and natural leadership, but with Raphael's thoughtful temperament, had every right to be confused. Mom, Diego said carefully, about what Sophia said yesterday. Sophia is your aunt, I said, the words feeling foreign. Your grandfather has other children, 3 of them. Diego's fork clattered against his plate. But that's impossible. Abuelo would never, he's always talking about family honor and integrity and… I know, mijo. My voice cracked. I know what he taught us. Rafael reached across the table and covered Diego's hand with his own. Son, sometimes people we respect make choices that disappoint us. That doesn't mean everything they taught us was wrong, but it does mean we have to decide for ourselves what kind of men we want to be. The contrast was stark. Raphael's steady guidance versus my emotional chaos. Our son needed at least one parent who could think clearly through this crisis, and thank God he had that in his father. My phone buzzed with a text from Papa. Mija, can we talk today? It's important. Important. After 37 years of lies, now it was important to talk. I need to see him, I said, standing on unsteady legs. I'll drive you. Raphael offered immediately. No. I shook my head. I need to do this alone. But thank you for. I gestured at the breakfast table, at Diego's calmer demeanor, at the stability Raphael had provided while I crumbled. Thank you for being their rock while I couldn't be. Raphael's eyes were soft with understanding. That's what marriage is, Laura. When one falls, the other stands. When you're ready, I'll be here. I drove to my parents' house in a daze, passing familiar landmarks that suddenly looked different. The restaurant where Papa had taught me to negotiate my first business deal, the church where our family had attended Mass every Sunday, where Papa's generous donations had funded the new stained glass windows, the community center bearing a plaque honoring Roberto Mendoza's contributions to local youth programs, all of it built on deception. Mama answered the door with red-rimmed eyes but her usual composed smile. Carmen Mendoza at 70 had perfected the art of graceful endurance. Her dark hair was pulled back in its customary bun, her dress pressed and modest. She looked exactly like the saintly woman who'd raised me to believe in honesty above all else. Mija, she said, embracing me with trembling arms. I know you have questions. Papa sat in his leather recliner, the one he'd occupied every evening for as long as I could remember. But something was different. The man who'd always seemed larger than life looked smaller now, diminished. His powerful shoulders were hunched, his weathered hands clasped tightly in his lap. Laura, he said without looking up, I suppose Sophia contacted you. The casual way he said her name, Sophia, as if she were a familiar friend, rather than the daughter who'd just destroyed my understanding of reality, made anger flare in my chest. 37 years, Papa, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. You've had another family for 37 years. He finally looked up, and I saw something I'd never seen before in Roberto Mendoza's eyes. Shame. This man who'd taught me that admitting fault was the first step toward redemption couldn't meet my gaze. It started before you were born, he said quietly. I was young, scared about providing for your mother. Maria Martinez, she worked at the supplier's office in Miami. One weekend trip became more. When Sophia was born, I knew I had to do right by them. One weekend? The words exploded out of me. Papa, Sophia is 3 years younger than me. And what about Miguel and Carmen? Were they accidents too? Papa's silence stretched too long, and in that silence I understood. Sophia might have been an accident, a moment of weakness when he was young and overwhelmed. But Miguel and Carmen, born years later, those were choices, deliberate decisions to continue a relationship that was destroying our family's foundation. Miguel and Carmen, I pressed, they weren't accidents, were they? You chose to keep going back to Maria. You chose to build a life with her while married to Mama. Mama flinched at my harsh words, but Papa held up his hand, the same gesture he'd used throughout my childhood to maintain order and demand respect. Watch your tone, Mija. I'm still your father. The audacity of it, demanding respect while admitting to decades of deception, made me laugh bitterly. Are you? Because the father I know would never lie to his family for 37 years. The father I know taught me that integrity is everything. I do have integrity, Papa said, his voice gaining strength. I've supported both families. I've never abandoned my responsibilities to any of my children. Responsibilities? I stared at him in disbelief. You created a second family and hid it from us. You let me believe you were this paragon of virtue while you were living a double life. I kept both families safe, Papa said defensively. Sophia and her children wanted for nothing. You and Diego wanted for nothing. I provided for everyone.
By lying to everyone.
The room fell silent, except for Mama's quiet crying. I looked at her, this woman who'd packed Papa's suitcases for business trips to Miami, who'd never questioned his absences, who'd smiled and played the perfect wife while knowing her husband was building another life. Mama, I said, my voice breaking, how long have you known? She looked up with tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. Since Sophia was born, Mija, Roberto came home from that trip different. Guilty. I confronted him and he told me about Maria, about the baby. Why didn't you leave him? Mama's smile was heartbreaking in its sadness. Where would I go? I had a toddler to think about, and he was still a good provider, still came home to us. In our culture, Midja, sometimes we endure things for the sake of the family. But you knew about the other children? Miguel and Carmen? Mama's face hardened slightly. I knew, and I told Roberto each time that he was making choices that would hurt you someday, but he said he couldn't abandon children he'd brought into the world. What about the child he'd already brought into the world? I demanded, pointing to myself. What about me? What about Diego? Papa's expression darkened. You think you were neglected? You think you suffered? You had everything, Laura. The best schools, the best opportunities. You had a father who was present, who taught you, who guided you. Maria's children, they only had money. They had to share me with another family. Not just another family, I yelled. With your wife and daughter, the ones you promised before God to honor. He glanced at Mama and inhaled. I will not discuss my marriage with you. I took care of all of my children. I glared at him. His twisted logic hit me like a physical blow. In Papa's mind, he'd given me more because he'd been physically present, so he owed the other family more financially to compensate for his absence. He'd rationalized his betrayal as a form of balance. So you gave them more money to ease your guilt about not being there, I said slowly, understanding dawning. You bought them houses and paid for expensive educations because you couldn't tuck them in at night? I did what I thought was fair, Papa said stiffly. Fair? I stood up, pacing to the window that overlooked the backyard where Papa had taught me to throw a baseball, where he'd pushed me on the swing set, where he'd promised me that hard work and honesty would always be rewarded. Papa, you have 3 children with another woman. You've been paying for their college, their weddings, their lives, and you call that fair to the family you actually lived with? But even as I said it, I realized the cruel irony. Papa had given me something more valuable than money, his time, his attention, his daily presence. The other children had grown up with financial security, but without their father's daily guidance. In his twisted way, he'd been trying to balance the scales. My phone rang, Raphael calling to check on me. I declined it, but seeing his name reminded me of the difference between a man who chose integrity and one who rationalized compromise. What about Diego? I asked. How do I explain to my son that his hero has been lying to us his entire life? Papa's expression softened slightly. Diego will understand. He's a Mendoza, but he's also a Herrera, and Rafael has raised him well. The boy has more sense than either of us sometimes. It was true. Diego's thoughtful nature came from Rafael's influence, tempering the Mendoza intensity with careful consideration of consequences. What about the inheritance? I asked, dreading the answer. Well, Papa looked uncomfortable. I'm revising my will. All my children need to be treated equally. Equally? I laughed bitterly. Papa, you've already given them more than you've given us. Sophia showed me the bank records, the houses, the educations, the cars. They've received more money over the years than your legitimate family ever has. All my children are legitimate, Papa said coldly. I've been a father to all of you. A secret father. And now you want to divide what's left equally, even though they've already received the larger share? But I could see in Papa's eyes that his mind was made up. The guilt he'd carried for 37 years had convinced him that equal division was the only way to make amends, regardless of what each family had already received. I moved toward the door, unable to stay in this house where every family photo on the wall now felt like a monument to deception. But Papa's voice stopped me. Laura, wait, there's something else you need to know. Something else. I turned back, dreading what new revelation would shatter what was left of my world. I'm sick, Papa said quietly. Liver problems. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months. The news hit me like a physical blow. Papa, invincible Papa, who'd seemed capable of outliving us all, was dying, and he'd spent his final healthy months planning to divide his legacy among children I'd never known existed while he was dying. How long have you known? I asked numbly. 3 months. That's when I contacted Sophia about meeting you. I didn't want to die with this secret still dividing my family. 3 months. 3 months he'd known he was dying, and he'd used that time to plan his financial betrayal of the daughter who'd worshipped him rather than trying to make amends for decades of lies. I left without another word, driving home through the Tampa streets that had shaped my childhood. Every corner held memories of Papa, the man who'd taught me to drive in the empty parking lot of his construction office, who'd taken me to work with him on Saturdays to teach me about business, who'd been my model for what a good man looked like. All of it built on a foundation of lies. When I got home, Diego was waiting with questions I couldn't answer, and Rafael was preparing dinner with the calm efficiency that characterized everything he did. My husband looked up as I entered, reading my face instantly. "How bad?" he asked quietly. "He's dying. Liver problems. 6 months, maybe less." Rafael set down his knife and crossed to embrace me. "I'm sorry, Amor. Whatever else he's done, losing him will hurt." "He wants to split everything equally among all 4 children," I said into his shoulder. "Even though the other family has already received more than we have." "Money isn't everything," Rafael said gently. "Diego has something those other children never had. A grandfather who was present, who taught him, who shaped his character. That's worth more than any inheritance." It was exactly what Papa had tried to tell me, but coming from Rafael, it sounded like wisdom rather than rationalization. My husband had a way of finding truth in even the most painful situations. "But Diego's college fund—" "We'll figure it out," Rafael said firmly. "We always do. Diego is smart, hardworking, and he has 2 parents who will do whatever it takes to help him succeed. He doesn't need Roberto's money to build a good life." Looking at my husband, this steady, honorable man who'd never made me doubt his integrity, I realized that Diego had something more valuable than Papa's inheritance. He had a father who showed up every day, who kept his word, who built his life on truth rather than convenient lies. But the damage was spreading beyond our family. Over the following days, word of Papa's double life began circulating through Tampa's Hispanic business community. The man who'd been held up as a paragon of family values was revealed as someone who'd maintained a secret family for decades. Some business partners began questioning other aspects of Papa's dealings. If he could lie about something this fundamental, what else had he been deceptive about? Contracts were reviewed, partnerships reconsidered. Mendoza Construction reputation began showing cracks. "Laura," my assistant said during a private moment, "I hate to bring this up, but some of the executives are asking questions about your family situation. They're wondering if this affects your position here." The professional consequences I hadn't even considered. My career, built on a foundation of ethical leadership, was now associated with a family scandal that called into question everything about my judgment and values. That evening, I found Diego in his room, staring at homework he clearly couldn't concentrate on. When he looked up, I saw something that broke my heart: the loss of innocence that comes when a child realizes the adults they've trusted are fallible. "Dad and I had a long talk today," Diego said quietly, "about Abuelo, about what this means for our family." "What did he say?" I asked, sitting on the edge of his bed. "He said that good people sometimes make terrible choices, but that doesn't mean we stop believing in goodness. He said that Abuelo's lies don't have to become our truth." Raphael's wisdom filtered through our son's understanding. Even in the midst of this crisis, my husband was teaching Diego how to process disappointment without becoming cynical. "He also said something else," Diego continued. "He said that I'm lucky to have a father who shows me what integrity looks like every day, so I don't have to guess what it means to be a good man." I felt tears prick my eyes. While I'd been focused on what Papa's betrayal had taken from us, Rafael had been helping Diego see what it couldn't touch: the daily example of a man who chose honesty over convenience, who kept his word even when it cost him, who built his life on truth. "Do you believe him?" I asked. Diego nodded slowly. "I believe Dad. He's never lied to me, never broken a promise, never been anything other than who he says he is. If Abuelo had been more like Dad—" He didn't finish the sentence. but he didn't need to. In the space of a few days, Diego's primary male role model had shifted from his grandfather to his father. The destruction of one relationship had strengthened another. But as I tucked my son into bed that night, I realized the most terrifying truth of all. I was still carrying enough anger to destroy what was left of our family's integrity. The woman who had almost plotted revenge against Sophia was still lurking inside me, waiting for the right moment to emerge. I needed help, more help than Raphael could provide, more wisdom than I could find in my own experience. I needed something or someone bigger than myself to show me how to navigate this crisis without losing my soul in the process. 3 weeks after the devastating discovery of Papa's double life, I found myself doing the unthinkable, sitting in my car outside Sophia's house in Coral Gables. I stared at the beautiful four-bedroom home Papa had bought for his secret family. The manicured lawn, the luxury cars in the driveway, the obvious prosperity, all funded by the man who taught me that family comes first while systematically putting us second. I'd driven here in a rage, planning to confront Sophia about the inheritance, about her children taking what should have been Diego's future. But as I sat there, engine running, hands gripping the steering wheel, I realized something horrifying about myself. I was plotting revenge. Laura Mendoza, who'd built her HR career on ethical leadership and fair conflict resolution, was planning to destroy Papa's other daughter to protect her own interests. The apple hadn't fallen far from the tree after all. My plan was elegant in its cruelty. A few strategic phone calls to Papa's business partners, letting them know about his character issues and the potential scandal of his double life. Anonymous tips to the construction licensing board about the financial irregularities that would inevitably surface once his dual family expenses were examined. A carefully orchestrated whisper campaign that would destroy his reputation in the Hispanic business community he'd worked 40 years to cultivate. I justified it as protecting Diego's future. Papa's other children had already received the best educations money could buy, while my son was applying for scholarships. They'd lived in luxury while we'd scraped and saved. It was only fair that they shouldn't get the inheritance too. But sitting outside Sophia's house, I realized the terrible truth. I was becoming exactly like Roberto Mendoza, planning deception to protect my family, choosing self-interest over honesty, building lies to maintain my version of reality. My phone buzzed with a text from Diego. "Mom, where are you? Dad's starting dinner and we're worried." Dinner. Another family ritual where Raphael would hold our family together while I fell apart. Another evening where my husband would be the stable parent while I spiraled into bitterness. I drove home in silence, the weight of my intended betrayal heavy in my chest. When I walked into our kitchen, Raphael was cleaning the kitchen while Diego sat working on homework. My family, the people I'd used to justify every vengeful thought, looked up with concern. "You've been gone for hours," Raphael said gently, studying my face with the perception that came from 27 years of marriage. "We were worried." "I was thinking," I said, which was technically true. "About what?" Diego asked, and something in his tone made me look at him more carefully. My son's face held a wariness I'd never seen before, as if he was studying me, evaluating me, measuring me against some standard I couldn't identify. The same way I'd looked at Papa when his lies were revealed. "About Papa and the inheritance and what we're going to do," I answered honestly. Diego exchanged a glance with Raphael before turning back to me. "Mom, can I ask you something?" I nodded, settling into the chair across from him. "Are you planning to hurt them? Sophia and her kids?" The directness of the question caught me off guard. "What makes you think that?" "Because you've been acting different. Secretive. Going places you won't talk about. Making phone calls and hanging up when I walk in the room." Diego's voice was steady but sad. "You're acting like Abuelo did when he was hiding things from us." The comparison hit like a physical blow. My son was watching me transform into the same kind of person Papa had been. A person who justified lies and deception in the name of protecting family. Raphael reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "Laura, talk to us. What's going on?" I can't let them take everything from Diego, I said, the words tumbling out. Those kids have already gotten so much more than we have. The houses, the educations, the opportunities, and now Papa wants to give them equal shares of what's left? It's not fair. So you're going to make it fair? Raphael asked quietly. By destroying people who didn't ask to be born into this situation? They're not innocent victims, I said defensively. Sophia knew about us. She chose to contact us now when Papa is dying to make sure she gets her share. She could have reached out years ago if she really wanted a relationship. Maybe, Raphael said. Or maybe she was protecting her family the same way you're trying to protect yours. Diego had been listening to this exchange with growing alarm. Mom, what exactly were you planning to do? I looked into my son's face, so much like Papa's, in its intensity, but tempered with Raphael's thoughtfulness, and saw myself through his eyes. A woman consumed by bitterness, planning destruction, rationalizing revenge as justice. I don't know, I whispered, and for the first time, I meant it. I don't know who I am anymore. Everything I believed about our family, about Papa, about myself, it's all lies, and I'm so angry I can't think straight. Then don't think, Raphael said gently. Feel. What do you feel when you imagine hurting Sophia's family? I closed my eyes and tried to honestly assess what revenge would cost me. Empty, I admitted, like I'd won something that wasn't worth having. And what do you feel when you imagine letting go of the anger? Diego asked. Terrified, I said immediately. Because if I'm not angry, then I have to figure out how to grieve, how to forgive, how to rebuild everything I thought I knew about love and family and integrity. Raphael squeezed my hand. You don't have to do it alone. But that was the problem. I'd been trying to carry this burden with help from Raphael and Diego, and it was still crushing me. The anger was too big, the betrayal too deep, the disappointment too overwhelming for human comfort alone. That night, I walked through our neighborhood, past houses filled with families I assumed were normal, functional, honest. The contrast with my own family's chaos was almost unbearable. I ended up at the small park where I'd pushed Diego on swings when he was little, where Rafael and I had walked off arguments during the early years of our marriage, where our family had celebrated countless milestones. The memories should have comforted me, but instead they felt contaminated by the knowledge that Papa's lies had been part of our story all along. Sitting on a bench under the stars, I faced the truth I'd been avoiding. I was broken in a way that couldn't be fixed by strategy or determination or even the love of good people. The foundation of my identity had crumbled, and I didn't know how to rebuild it. My phone rang. Raphael, checking on me. I'm at the park, I said before he could ask. Want company? I want to figure out how to be a person who can forgive the unforgivable and love the unlovable and find hope when everything feels hopeless. And I don't think that's something you can help me with. Raphael was quiet for a moment. No, he said finally, but I know someone who can. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness thinking, for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't sure I could handle something on my own. The woman who'd solved everyone else's problems, who'd climbed corporate ladders and managed family crises, who'd prided herself on self-sufficiency, that woman was broken. I needed help from someone bigger than myself. Not just to solve the practical problems of inheritance and family dynamics, but to become the kind of person who could navigate this crisis without losing her soul in the process. The kind of person Diego deserved to have as a mother. The kind of person who could honor the good things Papa had taught me while rejecting the example of his deception. Looking up at the stars, I whispered my first honest prayer in years. I can't do this. I don't know how to forgive him. I don't even know how to stop hating him. But I can't become him either. Help me. It wasn't much of a prayer. It certainly wasn't eloquent or theologically sophisticated. But it was true, and somehow I sensed that truth mattered more than pretty words. When I finally walked home, Raphael was waiting on the porch with 2 cups of coffee, as if he'd known exactly when I'd be ready for company. My husband, the steady, faithful man who'd never given me reason to doubt his word, looked up with hope in his eyes. Better? He asked. Different, I said, settling beside him. I think I'm ready to try a different approach. What kind of approach? I thought about Margaret from accounting's offer to pray for our family, about the quiet faith I'd seen in some of my colleagues, about the peace that seemed to sustain people who had something I didn't, the kind that starts with admitting I need help, I said, from someone bigger than both of us. Raphael smiled, the first genuinely peaceful expression I'd seen on his face in weeks. I think that's the wisest thing you've said since this whole crisis started. He was right. And for the first time since Sophia's email had shattered my world, I felt like maybe there was a path forward that didn't require me to become someone I couldn't live with. 3 months after Sophia's revelation shattered my world, I found myself in the most unlikely place, a small community church near Tampa Bay that I'd driven past thousands of times but never entered. The sign outside read, "Broken People Welcome," and for the first time in my adult life, I qualified. I'd left the house that morning telling Raphael I was going to visit Papa, who'd been steadily declining since his diagnosis. But instead, I found myself driving aimlessly through the city, past landmarks that held memories of the man I thought I knew. The anger that had sustained me for months was finally giving way to something deeper and more painful, grief for the father I'd lost and the family foundation that had never really existed. The church parking lot was nearly empty on this Wednesday morning. I sat in my car for 15 minutes, arguing with myself about going inside. Laura Mendoza didn't need spiritual counseling. I was a problem solver, a strategic thinker, someone who relied on logic and planning. But months of logic and planning had only made everything worse. The sanctuary was simple, peaceful. No gilded statues or elaborate decorations, just wooden pews and clear windows that let in the Florida sunshine. An elderly woman was arranging flowers near the altar, humming softly. I slipped into a back pew, hoping she wouldn't notice me. "First time visiting?" she asked with a warm smile. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "I'm Margaret. Been arranging these flowers every Wednesday for 20 years. There's something healing about making beautiful things, don't you think?" "I don't know how to make anything beautiful anymore," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Margaret set down her flowers and studied my face with kind, knowing eyes. "Honey, you look like someone carrying a weight too heavy for one person to bear." The simple observation broke something loose inside me. Before I knew it, I was telling the stranger everything. Papa's secret family, the financial betrayal, Diego's shattered faith in his grandfather, my own plans for revenge that had nearly destroyed what was left of my integrity. "I've been so angry," I finished, tears streaming down my face, angrier than I've ever been in my life. And the worst part is, I almost became exactly like him. I almost chose deception and revenge over honesty. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. "Anger makes sense, dear. Betrayal hurts, but anger without somewhere to put it just eats you alive from the inside." "I don't know where to put it," I admitted. "I can't forgive him. I don't even want to forgive him. What he did was unforgivable." "Was it?" Margaret asked gently. "Or are you just not ready to forgive yet? How can I forgive someone who destroyed my entire understanding of who I am? Everything I believed about family, about integrity, about the man who raised me, all lies." Margaret was quiet for a long moment, continuing to arrange flowers with gentle, practiced hands. "Can I tell you something about forgiveness, Laura? It's not about letting the other person off the hook. It's about getting yourself off the hook." "I don't understand." "Right now, your father's choices are controlling your life. His deception is making you deceptive. His selfishness is making you selfish. His lies are making you consider lies of your own. Forgiveness is the only way to break free from that cycle." I shook my head. "But if I forgive him, doesn't that make what he did okay?" "Lord, no," Margaret said with a small laugh. "Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending wrong is right. It means choosing not to let someone else's wrong destroy your right." We sat in silence while I processed her words. Through the clear windows, I could see Tampa Bay stretching to the horizon, endless and peaceful despite the storms that occasionally crossed its surface. I don't know how, I finally said. I don't know how to forgive something this big. You don't start with the big things, Margaret said. You start with Jesus. Jesus? Honey, Jesus knows what it's like to be betrayed by someone you trust. He knows what it's like to watch people you love make choices that hurt you, and he's the only one strong enough to carry the weight you're trying to bear alone. She pulled a small Bible from her purse and opened it to a page marked with a worn ribbon. Listen to this. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Rest. The word hit me like cool water on a burn. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt rested, truly rested in my soul, rather than just physically tired from carrying anger and disappointment and fear. I used to go to church, I said, every Sunday growing up, then occasionally as an adult, but I never really connected. It felt like going through motions. Because you didn't need Jesus then, Margaret said, matter of factly. You had everything under control: success, family, respect. Why would you need a savior when you could save yourself? Her words stung because they were true. I'd attended Mass out of cultural obligation, not spiritual hunger. Prayer had been a formality, not a conversation. Jesus had been a distant historical figure, not a present help in time of trouble. But now? I asked. Now you've discovered that you can't save yourself from this. You can't strategic plan your way out of betrayal. You can't manage your way through grief. You need someone stronger than you are. I sat there in that simple sanctuary, sunlight streaming through plain windows, and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not the resolution of my problems, but a deep quiet that seemed to come from beyond myself. What do I do? I whispered. You talk to Jesus like he's sitting right there beside you, Margaret said. Because he is. For the next hour, I did something I'd never done before. I had an actual conversation with Jesus, not recited prayers or formal requests, but honest, broken dialogue. I told him about my anger, my disappointment, my fear that Diego would lose faith in everything good because of Papa's betrayal. I admitted my desire for revenge, my willingness to compromise my values to protect my interests. And somehow, in that conversation, I began to understand that Jesus hadn't just been betrayed. He'd been betrayed by someone he'd chosen, someone he'd loved, someone he'd trusted with his life. If anyone could understand my pain, it was him. I can't forgive Papa yet, I finally said out loud, but I want to be able to. Can you help me want to forgive him? It wasn't a complete surrender, but it was a beginning, a tiny crack in the wall of anger I'd built around my heart. When I finally left the church, Margaret hugged me like an old friend. Come back next Wednesday, she said. Bring that heavy load with you, and we'll keep giving it to Jesus, piece by piece. Driving home, I felt different. Not healed. The pain was still there, the betrayal still real, but I wasn't carrying it alone anymore. I wasn't planning revenge or plotting strategy or trying to control outcomes I couldn't control. I was just a daughter who'd been hurt, talking to a father who understood, one honest conversation at a time. That evening, I found Diego and Rafael in the living room, ostensibly watching television, but really waiting for me to come home and explain where I'd been for 4 hours. My son looked up with the cautious expression he'd worn for months, studying my face for signs of the anger that had been consuming me. I went to church, I said simply, settling into the chair across from them. Church? Raphael looked surprised but hopeful. On a Wednesday? Not our church. A different one. A small place where I could think. I looked directly at Diego, whose attention was now fully focused on me. I've been angry for so long, mijo. Angry at Abuelo, angry at the situation, angry at God for letting this happen, but mostly angry at myself for almost becoming someone I didn't recognize. Diego muted the television. What do you mean? I mean, I was planning to hurt Sofia and her children to protect us. I was ready to destroy Abuelo's reputation, maybe even his business, to make sure we got what I thought we deserved. The words tasted bitter, but they needed to be said. I was becoming exactly like him, someone who justifies wrong choices by claiming to protect family. But you didn't do it, Diego said quietly. Only because you stopped me. Because you were brave enough to tell me I was turning into someone you might lose too. I reached for his hand. You saved me from becoming him, Diego. You reminded me that integrity isn't conditional. It doesn't disappear when we're hurt or threatened. Raphael moved to sit beside me on the couch, his presence as steady and comforting as always. So what now? Now I learn how to forgive someone who doesn't deserve it, I said. Not because he's earned it, but because I can't carry this anger anymore. It's poisoning everything good in my life. Over the following weeks, I returned to that small church every Wednesday. Margaret became not just a friend but a guide, helping me navigate the difference between forgiveness and foolishness, between grace and enabling. She introduced me to other women who'd walked similar paths, wives betrayed by husbands, children disappointed by parents, people who'd learned that forgiveness was a process, not a single decision. The practical matters still needed addressing. Sophia and I eventually met for coffee, a tense, awkward conversation that nonetheless established basic ground rules for Papa's final months and the inheritance division. She was surprisingly understanding about my initial anger, admitting that she'd harbored her own resentments about being the secret family all these years. Your father tried to do right by everyone, she said, but you can't build a life on secrets and expect it not to eventually collapse. Papa's health continued declining. The liver disease was aggressive. I found myself in the strange position of needing to care for a man I was still learning to forgive, while watching my mother finally express some of the anger she'd suppressed for 37 years. Roberto, I found Mama saying to Papa one afternoon when she thought I couldn't hear, "You're dying, and you still haven't truly apologized for what you did to this family. You still think you were being noble, providing for everyone. You never understood that we needed your honesty more than your money." It was the first time I'd ever heard my mother confront Papa directly about his choices. Carmen Mendoza had spent nearly 4 decades playing the role of the supportive wife, but I guess facing his impending death had finally freed her to speak her truth. And Laura, Mama continued, her voice gaining strength, she deserves more than a quarter of your estate. She deserves the business, the properties, the recognition that she was your legitimate child, the one who honored your name even when you didn't deserve it. Papa's response was weak but telling. Carmen, I gave Laura something more valuable than money. My time, attention, presence, love. The others only had what I could buy them. Then why are you giving them the larger inheritance? Mama demanded. If Laura already received the greater gift, why does she get the smaller financial legacy? For the first time, I heard Papa acknowledge the contradiction in his logic. Because, because I feel guilty about what I couldn't give them. But you're right. Laura deserves more recognition of what she meant to me. 3 days later, Papa called me to his bedside and handed me a revised will. The business would go to Diego when he turned 25, with me managing it until then. The primary residence would remain Mama's for life, then pass to me. The other properties would be divided among all 4 children, but I would receive the larger share. It's not perfect, Papa said weakly. Nothing about this situation can be perfect, but it's more fair. And I wanted you to know whatever mistakes I made, whatever lies I told, my love for you and Carmen was never a lie. You were my greatest achievement, Mija. Not the business, not the money. You. It was as close to a real apology as Roberto Mendoza was capable of giving. Not complete, not fully satisfying, but genuine within the limits of his ability to understand the damage he'd caused. Papa died 4 weeks later, peacefully at home with both his families present. The funeral was awkward, painful, and strangely healing all at once. Sophia's children were gracious. Diego was mature beyond his years, and I grieved the father I'd loved while also mourning the father I thought he was. At the service, I spoke about forgiveness, not because Papa had earned it, but because holding on to anger would have poisoned everything good he'd actually given me. The work ethic, the business principles that were sound even if his personal life wasn't, the deep love for family that had led him to make impossible choices. Roberto Mendoza was a complicated man, I said to the packed church. He made choices that hurt people he loved. But he also raised a daughter who learned that integrity matters more than success, that honesty is harder than lies, and that forgiveness is possible even when it feels impossible. After the service, several people approached me. Business associates who'd noticed my grace in handling the scandal, church members who'd been touched by my words about redemption, young people who needed to see that betrayal doesn't have to destroy you. But the comment that mattered most came from Diego as we stood beside Papa's grave after everyone else had left. Mom, he said, I'm proud of how you handled all of this. Not because you forgave Abuelo, but because you chose not to become someone bitter. I'm proud to be Dad's son because he showed me what it looks like to be a man of integrity, even when everything around you is falling apart. Looking at my son, 17 years old, and already showing wisdom that had taken me decades to develop, I realized that Papa's betrayal wasn't the end of our family's story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, where integrity wasn't just something we talked about, but something we chose every day, especially when it was difficult. Rafael and I have grown closer through this crisis. I've spent more time with Mama, helping her navigate life without Papa, while also processing her own complicated grief over a marriage built on love and lies. She's stronger than I gave her credit for, and she's been clear about her pride in how I handled the situation. I still work in HR and help families navigate crises with the wisdom I gained from navigating my own. I still attend that small church by the bay where Margaret and I arrange flowers every Wednesday and talk about how God specializes in making beautiful things from broken pieces. And Diego? He's studying both business and counseling at university, preparing to help other families find healing when foundations crumble, while also learning to run Papa's construction company with integrity. Papa aspired to but never fully achieved. He's learned that heroes aren't perfect people, but people who choose to do right even when wrong has been done to them. The inheritance was settled, according to Papa's final wishes, but by then it mattered less than I'd expected. We'd gained something more valuable than money, the knowledge that our worth isn't determined by what others give us or take from us, but by who we choose to be when life doesn't go according to plan. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is the opportunity to discover that grace is available even for the unforgivable, that healing is possible even after betrayal, and that Jesus is enough even when everything else falls apart. Especially then,